right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. My name is Joseph. I am an ELT consultant with eFuture, and I've been with eFuture for just about 3 years. Um, I am based in Korea, and I've lived here for 13 years now. Uh, and before I was working at eFuture, I did a little bit of everything. I taught students of all ages from as young as 3, 4 years old all the way up to 80 years old. So I've worked with a range of students before I started doing content development and teacher training and things like that. So I'm going to be talking about some of my experiences today with that and how I like to use inquiry-based learning in my classroom. So the title of my presentation today is The Who, What, When, Where, Why, and How of Inquiry and Discovery. And I use those words because they are very, very important to inquiry. Those WH questions, those WH question words, I should say, are really, really important to generating important questions. So, before I get started, I want to take a deep dive, but a very slightly sarcastic one, as we look at the history of education. And this is a very, very short, basic timeline. It kind of covers and connects up to some of the other presentations where they talked about like technology and things like that. But for educators, we really can trace the history of like schooling and testing and things like that to a couple of really key points. So all the way back in the year 581 in China, this is when the examination system really began. And with the examination system in China, this was the first instance of creating merit-based testing. And so merit-based testing also meant standardized testing, which would be something that became very, very important to education as we go through. Um, you jump a few centuries up to 1763, and in Prussia, which eventually became Germany, this is where the education system formally creates a form of compulsory public education. So this was the first time that children were required to go to school and to get a basic degree of a basic level of education. Um, Moving up into the 1840s, Horace Mann establishes a standardized public education in the United States. And so taking that compulsory education and creating a set of standards that would be testable, that would be usable to ensure that all students were hitting certain benchmarks. And then this was really fully codified in the United States, at least in 1892. But in that 1892 year is basically the same structure, the general foundation for education in the Western world primarily. Uh, that structure has been in existence since then, and it didn't change very much for a really long time. But the biggest change to that education foundation was the advent of the personal computer. So in 1980, when personal computers become publicly available and more widely available, that starts to change how educational access and the mediums in which we are educating students really starts to change. But overall, the education system that we went through as children, most of us, I'm sure all of us here are adults, that is the system that has existed for a really, really long time. And there have been changes and there have been developments, small incremental ones, but overall, the system of education has been pretty consistent throughout educational history. But because of that consistency, there are some systemic issues that we are coming up against when we talk about education today and the needs of students today in the 21st century. One of the biggest problems is that the traditional school structure discourages creativity. And it's not because of the teachers. It's not because teachers don't care or educators in schools don't care about creativity. It's that there are certain requirements that schools have and that schools need to get things like funding or to meet the expectations of parents who pay tuition if it's a private school or parents who have high expectations for their students. So traditional school structures are they have to meet these specific benchmarks, and again these benchmarks were created in the 1890s. Um, so the other problem is that educators go through a series of trainings, but they don't get training in the application and the communication of creativity. And there's a reason for that. It's very difficult to teach creativity. I would even say that it's impossible to teach creativity. Creativity is something that comes from within a person. But what we can do as educators is we can foster that creative drive within our students. But there is little training that is devoted to fostering that creativity within our students. Um, 21st century skills are commonly championed in theory, but the application is not something the average teacher is equipped to do. There are many teachers that come in as teachers because it's a job that they can get easily, but they don't have a lot of formal training. And 21st century skills development is something that does require a lot of practice, a lot of demonstration, navigating, lesson planning, classroom management, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of practice and training that is required. So we can talk about the 21st century skills, but if we are not training ourselves to use the 21st century skills, we can't necessarily use them effectively. And finally, like research is focused on planning creative teaching styles or designing special programs for creativity. But like I said before, not enough attention is given to fostering that creativity in those core class subjects. Creativity is usually presented as a supplement or as a special class in other things, but in a standard math, science, English class, you're not going to really see people focusing on creativity as the driving force to their classrooms. I'm not going to be focusing on math or science predominantly in this class, but there are things that we can talk about here that can be applied in those classes as well. I'll be focusing on English, obviously, but it's still something that's very important to think about. And of course, something that creates a lot of these issues is that, like I mentioned before, creativity manifests itself differently in every student. So we're going to look at how to navigate these systemic issues. Um, and one way that we can do this is by thinking about thinking. And when I say thinking about thinking, there is a term for that. I put it in small text because it's not that important. You may have understood or may have heard or come across this term before, and that's metacognition. But metacognition is really just thinking about thinking. Um, and the way we're going to be thinking about thinking in this presentation is through two basic modes: divergent thinking and convergent thinking. I'm going to really focus on divergent thinking because it is the central, like the cornerstone of inquiry based learning. And that's because divergent thinking generates ideas, multiple ideas, to develop many solutions. So there's a lot of brainstorming where you come up with all of these ideas, and then from all of these ideas, you choose the best option. But divergent thinking also accepts that there might be more than one answer to a problem. And there might be more perspectives that we can use to solve a problem. So that's really, really a useful thing to promote and to use and incorporate in our classes. The other type of thinking that I'll talk about is convergent thinking. And convergent thinking focuses on reaching one well defined, or you could call this a correct solution to a problem. Um, Convergent thinking is not a bad thing because there is a logical process to it. Uh, and that's very, very important. Um, Multiple choice questions require convergent thinking. So if you have students taking tests, if they do a lot of test prep, they need to know how to use convergent thinking to eliminate incorrect answers to find the one correct answer. So both types of thinking are really, really important. But when we look at inquiry based learning, we're going to really focus on divergent thinking and how we can incorporate that to embrace creativity in our classrooms. So, just a couple of quick definitions here. What is creativity? Creativity is the ability and desire to imagine original ideas and solutions to problems. You can think of this in another way as a critical thinking skill, but it's also the expression of how we think about our experiences and how our experiences and our surroundings impact ourselves and how we in turn impact those surroundings. And then in classroom activities, we can activate creativity, but creativity cannot be explicitly taught, like I mentioned. Creativity is an output skill, just like reading, sorry, not reading, just like speaking and writing. But the input is inspiration. So, where you would listen to speak, you need inspiration to create output or sorry, to produce creativity. So, um, you as a teacher can be that mode of inspiration, but there's no guarantee that you alone are enough to inspire your students to become creative. We need to think of different perspectives, different ideas, all sorts of things, but you can help guide them. Now, what is literacy? Literacy is important here because literacy can really drive creativity. And literacy is the ability, confidence, and willingness to engage with language. So we're going to be talking about English literacy, but this applies to literacy in any language. And in order to become a literate individual, we need to acquire, construct, and communicate meaning in all aspects of daily living. So, the literacy skills that we use in class, we need to take these skills and then connect them to our real world and our everyday lives. This is the ultimate goal of inquiry based learning, is to make those connections from the classroom and apply them to reality. And of course, literacy is a component of language education, but it's a major component of life as well and life skills. Inquiry-based learning. I've been saying this phrase a lot already, but what does it mean? Well, to put it very, very simply, it's a learning process that encourages students to make connections. Um, and encourage students to make connections by asking questions. Uh, so it's a kind of a problem solving. It's a method. It does require or encourage a lot of experiential learning. And we want the students to bring their experiences into the classroom and use those experiences to solve problems. Um, it doesn't mean that they can't learn from different perspectives as well, because they are doing that. But we want to really center the student in the learning here. And the way they participate in inquiry based learning is it starts just by asking questions. And you can use those WH question words to start the process. Um, but one of the really, really important things, and this is where we get into the discussions about divergent thinking and convergent thinking, inquiry based learning helps students process how to think. We are not teaching them what to think. It is not our job to be didactic. In I don't come into class and I want my students to think a certain way because of the lesson that I'm teaching. I want to provide them with the information uh, that they need to formulate their own opinions and their own perspectives on the learning. And the last thing that I want to talk about are the four C's of 21st century learning. Uh, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the four C's, but now, because information changes and develops and progresses and evolves, the four C's are no longer the four C's. They are the six C's of 21st century learning. So, beyond creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration, we have also added citizenship or culture and choice to the 21st century skills that we need to use and incorporate and teach in our classrooms. Choice is very, very important. But also, if we're trying to connect our students in the classroom to the rest of the world, we need to also embrace culture and citizenship kind of values in our education. Um, Now, when we link creativity and literacy, these things are closely associated with reading and writing. And it's because reading and writing encourage the same sort of characteristics needed for creativity. Chiefly, it's freedom and ability to communicate. Writing is one of the freest forms of expression that you can have once you are comfortable with navigating grammar and spelling and things like that. But reading and writing also contribute to self discovery because you can see yourselves in the stories that you read, or you can find those connections between what you're reading and what you're doing. And then there's also a lot of attention to the individual. When you write, it can be a very personal activity, but also when you read, we tend to gravitate to the stories or information that interests ourselves. We generally, if we have full control over what we're reading, we're not choosing stories we don't want to read. We're reading the things that have interest to ourselves. So that attention to the individual is very important. And of course, as you read, you're not reading words and not without processing the meanings. So there's a direct connection to thinking. And we have to think consciously about what we're writing on a page too. We don't write while meditating. It's not possible. We have to be very focused on what we're doing. So these skills encourage a lot of critical thinking. Uh, so very briefly, what happens when we read? One thing that happens when we read is that we acquire vocabulary and grammar in a natural context. And that's really, really important. Language acquisition is something that a few people have talked about during this conference, this Global eFuture Day conference and event. But language acquisition and natural acquisition is really, really important. Natural language processing, all of those things. I'm not going to get into that, but it is something that happens when we read. Another thing that happens when we read is that we create mental images. And we can create mental images just by looking at the words on a page, but we can also fortify these mental images by providing images within a book as well. We make value judgments when we read. Those value judgments can be as simple as I like this story, or I'm interested in this story, or I don't like this story, or I don't agree with this perspective. So very simple value judgments happen at all times. We learn about ourselves, we learn about the world around us, and we remember, we reflect, and we reminisce. Where if you read a story and you're like, oh, yes, I remember a situation that was like that, that's something that can happen automatically, even with minimal interaction and comprehension of the language that we're reading. Students with a low level of vocabulary at the pre A1 level, they can still do this. They can still make those connections by reading a story or listening to a story. Um, Now, the WH questions. These questions are really, really useful to ask and answer and discuss before, during, and after reading. And we should use them through all three phases of our learning process because they are a useful guideline for the students. We get to know what the students are thinking, what they're curious about. And for us as teachers, this helps us kind of create a framework and develop our learning structure. Um, students are able to ask and define what is meaningful to themselves. If the students are the ones that are in control of creating the questions, we can provide guidance. But if they are able to create questions, they're going to ask the questions that they are genuinely interested in and curious about. So the WH questions help guide them in that respect. And then these WH questions also, because the students are asking questions about things that they want to know more about, this also indicates to teachers what students already know or what they already understand or what connections they are making between the information that they are provided with and their own experiences, their own worldview. So these questions are really, really useful for establishing a basis of information understanding and comprehension. And of course, they lead to reflection and drawing conclusions. And we hope that that reflection is logical and that the conclusions are fact based. It's not always going to be that way, but that's the hope. Now, I'm going to talk about just kind of an inquiry based learning lesson plan structure. This isn't going to be a very tight structure, but this is just kind of ideas that you can pick and choose from and apply. So I hope they're useful. And to help me with this, I'm going to be using examples from our newest eFuture series, Discovery, which is a nonfiction reading series. So this book actually just came off the presses. It just became available. And if you have more questions about that, we can happily provide you with information. You can send us an email, and there's information on our website as well. But I'm sure you'll be seeing more of eFuture Discovery in the coming days. But if you are curious, there are some samples from here, from this book, that we're going to be using for the rest of this presentation. So, how do we start? One of the great things about images is uh, we can have a conversation without having uh, the necessary vocabulary, full vocabulary to discuss, because we can talk about the things that we recognize, the things that we know. So, oh dear, what's going on? There we go. We start with a question. That's really how we start. And the question that I usually start my lessons with when I start a new unit like this is, take a look at the picture. What do you see? And if you guys in the chat, if you want to, you can talk about what you see. Um, I'll be checking in and out of the chat as well, but take a look at what you see. Um, yeah, you see a chef. Uh, and do you know what he's cooking? He's cooking a kebab. Um, and what is a kebab made out of? If you're not sure, that's okay. But yeah, mostly meat, but it can be a different kind of meat. So that maybe it's beef, maybe it's lamb, sometimes it's chicken. Yeah, so all of these things, but that process of what we just did there in a very short instance, that is where we build. So from one question, what do you see? I can generate a number of other questions that follow that train of thought. And when I do this, I can build new responses and new questions and generate a conversation. So you see a chef. What is the chef cooking? If they know what a kebab is, that's great. We can talk about a kebab and we can talk about their experiences with a kebab. And the types of kebabs that they eat, because kebab is a very broad topic. And different countries around the world will claim different types of kebabs and things like that. But this is the kind of the Turkish style, right? Um, and or it could also be, if maybe your students are, I know we have somebody from Greece, maybe they'll be like, oh, this could be a gyro, and then you have a new discussion. So there's lots of things that you can talk about. Of course, not every class, not every student is going to be super responsive and super ready to answer questions. So, if you're not getting a lot of responses to your initial question, you can elicit responses by asking some more open ended questions or making statements. So, if we take a look at this picture and you go, oh, uh, you can relate to them through a personal story. You can say, oh, I ate this last week. Let me tell you what I put on it. It was really delicious. And then you can start telling them. So I got lamb, and there was some lettuce and some tomato. There was this really delicious sauce called tzatziki. I like it spicy, so I got a spicy sauce on there as well. And it was amazing. So you can start talking about that and generate interest that way. Uh, or you can stick with the picture and go, that knife is amazing, because it is a really amazing knife. It's huge. And you can get them to start talking about that knife. Or take a look at the environment. You can see that there's fire there. You can go, it must be really hot in the kitchen. But then the students have to think about, why is it hot in this kitchen? So eliciting responses encourages them to think if they're still struggling uh, to generate their own questions or answers to the things that they see. And of course, you can ask simple questions like, what kind of meat do you think that is? And these questions are not, there are some answers. There is a correct answer. So that's the convergent thinking. But they can't answer just yes or no. They can't just shake their head. They have to actually come up with an answer, which then incorporates divergent thinking, where they go, okay, this looks interesting. Maybe it looks like beef. It could be beef. It could be pork. But then you start, that leads to another set of discussions after you've done either building responses and generating questions or eliciting responses, then we can assess with the book activity. And this is wonderful here because right at the bottom of this page, there's the discoverer in the picture, and there are some basic questions. And so we can, based on our discussion, we can then establish, what do the students already know? And so this would be more of a diagnostic or a formative assessment that I would be doing here. But I'm making sure that I have all of my bases covered. And this is a very simple start. You can do this for as long as you want. I would recommend, I think, a basic picture talk like this, doing this for like 3 or 4 minutes is sufficient to get to build up some kind of a basis of understanding. But if your students are really, really interested, let them run with it. Keep talking about this picture, because that means they're showing you that they're really interested in this, or they have a lot of experience with this, and that's great. We want to center their responses, their feelings with this picture, and it may not happen every time, but when it does, it's really, really rewarding. So we can talk about, if they want to keep talking about the food, they want to talk about the knife or the chef, or maybe they have experiences with this. It's great. Let them do that. Now, an inquiry-based warm-up that I would use is something you want to make sure that you are connecting the students to the learning from the very beginning. And you want to personalize the warm-up. So make it meaningful to the students. Connect them to and their lives, their community, to the rest of the learning that they will get. You don't want to introduce any new concepts here. You want to just simply focus on what the students already know, the language that they've already mastered, and the language that they're comfortable with, but start there. And then, of course, embrace the uniqueness of your class. If you have students that are really shy, you have to kind of come up with new ideas and ways to navigate the type of learning that they have or the needs that they have. And then, of course, your warm up you should revisit during your wrap up. So, an inquiry based warm up that I would use is something like a discuss and report activity, but I provide options. So, again, going back to the 6 C's, choice is an important thing. So, what I would do is I would have three to five questions on the board, and I'd make this a paired activity. And I would tell the students, Choose one question to discuss. And then I want you to report back to the class and tell us what your partner said to you. I don't want them to talk about themselves. I want them to talk about their partners. So, some simple examples here. What did you have for dinner last night? How did your dinner make you feel? What interesting food or foods have you tried recently? What made it interesting? What are your top three favorite foods in the world and why? So they have options to talk about a similar topic, but in different ways and ways that are interesting in what they would want. So if one student were to choose the last question there, their top favorite foods, they go, oh, my partner's top three favorite foods in the world are, and they can say, if it was me, I would say it's French, Chinese, and Mexican. Those are my three favorite foods in the world. Um, and you can say why, but they might also say something like, oh, I like pizza, I like kebabs, and I like sushi. And so they can say there's multiple ways to answer this question as well. This is divergent thinking. So there's more than one correct answer. Now, why does this work? If we're using the six C's model, um, it embraces creativity because the students approach the lesson from their point of view from the very beginning. It encourages critical thinking because the students have to think about what the questions mean to them. And then they students have to explain their thought process as well by adding a simple why to the end of that question and adding that additional thing. They have to really think about why. Okay, why do I like Chinese food? Why do I like Mexican food? Um, and they can give answers based on their level and comfort. For communication, this activity is paired. So it's paired and it's shared. So you have to communicate on multiple levels and in multiple ways. And it also elevates quiet voices, which is something that I really like. When you're reporting what your partner says rather than what you're saying, if you have that shy student who is not necessarily willing to speak out loud, if that student is partnered with a student who is more vocal, you can have them share what the shyer student is saying, and their opinions get out into the world. And that can help build confidence as well. So it's a useful thing. It's collaborative because, again, the students are working together to develop their answers. And it's an opportunity to present a personalized cultural experience. So, talking about what you had for dinner, that is something that is, believe it or not, very closely linked to culture. Because if you have special traditions that you have at dinner, or if, say, it's there's a special holiday that causes your dinner to be something different, the culture and citizenship aspect of that will come out, and of course, choice because the students uh, are able to choose which questions they feel comfortable answering, but it also limits the impulse to copy their partners because there will be multiple conversations about different things. So let's take a look at the story from this unit here. So on famous foods, it's a short one you can read here, but if I will revisit these pages, so if you don't finish reading immediately, because I don't have a whole lot of time left, um, we'll come back to this. But in this unit, we talk about three foods. We've already talked about kebabs. So we have a different form of kebab here in the picture, but that's one of the foods that we talk about. We talk about dumplings and we talk about gelato. So those are the three types of foods that we're going to be talking about, and they are all famous in different parts of the world. Now, part of inquiry-based learning is developing high order thinking and developing high order questions. And this is a concept that was developed by Arthur Costa, where this is his system, not my system. But he created three levels of questions. Level one are the text-based questions. And this means that students can point to the answer in the textbook. And that is a valuable skill. It gets them through, it's a comprehension type questions. Level two are text implied questions. And so the students have to read the story or the passage, but then they infer answers based on the information from the text. They draw conclusions from information in the text. And then finally, level three, the highest order questions are experience based questions. So students go beyond the text and relate their personal experience and prior knowledge to what they get in the text and create questions through that process. And that can be quite challenging for young students. It can be challenging for adults as well. But these are the three types of questions. And we want to move our students through these types of questions as we go through the reading. Um, Oops, my level one questions disappeared. But so level one questions, the level two are there, but level one questions would be like, where are dumplings found? Or where does gelato come from? Uh, what is in a kebab? How are dumplings cooked? Things like that. Those are questions that they can find directly in the passage. So dumplings are cooked. Usually, they can point to it in the passage. People usually fry dumplings or boil them in water. So that's the answer to that. That's directly in there. It's a reading comprehension question. Once we get to level two, we start making inferences. So we can do things like, how are dumplings and kebabs similar? Now they can, as they read through, this is very basic, but the information says that dumplings have meat and vegetables on the inside, and they have dough on the outside. Kebabs are sticks of meat like chicken or beef, but they often have vegetables like onions and peppers. So now they have to make the connection. Both dumplings have meat and vegetables, something like that. When would someone most likely eat gelato? Gelato is like ice cream. So if it's like ice cream, when would you eat ice cream? Maybe for dessert or on a hot day. So again, we're making that inference. It's not explicitly stated in the text, but the students have to think about this critically to come up with these answers. Another challenging question, which students might not understand, but it is something that we'll get into other topics, like so it becomes kind of a clue based question, is where in East Asia might you find dumplings? So this is a geography question, and they have to think about Asia and what countries are in East Asia versus Central Asia or the Middle East. So knowing those geographic terms, that experiential learning, those bits of information are going to help them answer these questions. And then once we get into level three, we start again making connections with their experiences. So now it's not just the information here, but it's what meat and vegetables would you cook in your kebab? What foods in your country are similar to dumplings or kebabs or gelato? Why and how are they similar? So they have to think about foods that they eat on a regular basis and make those connections. Um, or we can start directing them towards research. And you can go, okay, I want you to learn more about the ingredients from each of the dishes in the story. Um, what, which of these foods do you think is the easiest to cook? This is a question if they know how to cook or they've cooked with their parents, things like that. Um, they think back to their experiences with cooking. They learn a little bit more about the food, but then you ask them to provide evidence to support their choices, which is really the next step. Now, a lot of these level one and level two questions, they are supported by the textbook themselves. We have activities, comprehension activities, graphic organizer activities, vocabulary activities that help ask those questions. And if you're stuck and you're not sure where to start, use the resources available for you. Use the student book. You can use the workbook as well to help you with eliciting questions or responses, creating questions, things like that. My goodness, I have 5 minutes. I'm running out of time. Um, but the last thing I really will kind of cover with any great detail here is how do we develop level three questions? This is a difficult thing to think about because it's experiential based. Well, one of the best ways that we can do that is through project based learning. Project based learning is a type of inquiry based learning, but it's a longer form of it. And I'm not going to go into great amounts of detail for project-based learning. Just give you kind of a snapshot of it. Um, but project-based learning uses 21st century skills as the framework. The 6 C's are very important. Students are guided by learning goals. They engage via a problem or a challenge, so they need to ask questions, research questions, if you will, and then they relate the problems that in a way that is familiar to them, and they think of how they would solve this problem. And then, of course, teachers effectively plan their lessons to aid students uh, through project-based learning. Now, for young learners, project-based learning is something that is a little bit harder to enact. So we have to think about, we have to be mindful of our students' level and ability when we are doing this. But uses for project-based learning include role playing, connecting language to real-world expertise, story writing or storytelling, self-directed learning, and language experimentation. All of these things are the central components to inquiry-based learning, to connecting creativity with literacy, and to using divergent and convergent thinking to create a more robust learning environment. The basic process for project-based learning is pretty rudimentary. It's pretty straightforward in what you have to do. The actual steps are a bit more complex, but basically, first you need to have language targets. So you need to use the book, study the book, review the language, have small games and activities to make sure that your students have the language ability to master these challenges. Then the big challenge is you propose a problem to your students. And then after they have a problem that they're going to have to deal with and come up with a solution to, you're going to discuss what the students know about the problem. Again, make those real life connections. This is not about learning new language. This is about establishing what they already know. Discuss what they know about the problem, and discuss what they need to know about the problem. So there's a little reflective practice there. And then the big challenge is research and synthesis. So this is where most of the work is going to take place, is research and synthesis. And then the students are going to create some sort of self-directed project. And then they present that project. So that this is the full course for a project-based learning process. Can you do this in one class? Absolutely not. You have to break this up over a series of classes. And that requires some good classroom management and good planning. So how do I make PBL and to an extent inquiry-based learning level appropriate for young learners? One of the big things to remember and to do is that you need to keep your projects small. You need to also regularly review the language targets because they're still getting familiar with the fluency and the literacy skills. You need to maintain EFL standards. You don't want to, it's very easy to slip into ESL standards when using project-based learning, but you want to remember your students, most of you, I'm sure, are in EFL environments. So you want to make sure that you are using those standards. And then also limit the number of necessary language targets. Keep it really simple for your students so that they don't get overwhelmed. And because of that, you're probably going to have to provide more structure. Um, so how do we encourage independent learning for young learners? You have some challenges. One, students may not be able to do research. They may either online or through books. They may not have that capability. They may not have access either. So what we can do is we provide students with information packets. We curate the information for the students to use, and once they have that set of information, then they can solve the problem. So it's very, very targeted. This is a bit more convergent than divergent, but sometimes we need that for students at a lower level. Students may not be able to remember or write a dialogue for a big project or for a presentation or a role play. So if that's the case, provide students with a script template. Give them a piece of paper where they do a kind of a closed reading or a gap fill type activity to help them write their script. They still have control over what goes into those gaps, but the structure is more guided for them. And the other is that students may not understand the problem or how to solve it. So use class warm-ups and activities to review and discuss mini problems, or chunk this big problem into small bits so that it becomes more digestible for the students. So these are some of the solutions broadly that are useful to help students get through project-based learning activities. Even if they are kindergarten or low-level elementary, you can still kind of navigate that from this level. But also use things like show and tell, introduce my friends, and use fun speaking warm ups to get them practicing comfortable with discussion, things like that. I am out of time, so my final thoughts here. Uh, Encourage creativity in your class. Remember, it's not something that you can teach, it is just something that you can foster and reinforce by inspiring your students. Embrace divergent thinking, accept that there might be more than one correct answer, and that your students are going to surprise you with some of the answers that they give. You may have a question that you think is very straightforward, but they may come at it from a different perspective. Center the learner in your learning, in your teaching, so that they are the focus, and encourage students to ask questions. Uh, make the environment comfortable for them. And when you get your students to ask questions, encourage them to ask high level questions. So those level 2 and level 3 questions are what we're aiming for. Um, those are really, really important. And then, of course, encourage investigation of those questions too. So it's not just they ask the question and you answer it. They ask the question, you go, that's a very interesting question. We should look into this more. Where can we go? And get them on the process of seeking out the answers on their own. So I will stop there. Thank you very, very much.